Only on them seas if it's breeze. Red ruby the sleeves, Chinese on my sleeve. These wanna be Chun-Lees anyway, yee-how.
I don't want to hurt you, bro. I do not want to shoot you. Put it down. You don't want to end it this way. You don't want to end it this way, brother. I promise you. Whatever happened today, it can be fixed. Don't pull the trigger. Put it down. Adeem, put it down, buddy. Don't do it, man. Put it down.
But he's got cover. All right. Hey, I was all the way down. Have we exfilled from that house?
The person you see here standing in the driveway with a gun still in his hands as he faces off against armed officers is just 14 years old.
One of the first ones we received was from a neighbor who said that there was a male who fled his house and he'd been shot several times. At the same time, we received a 911 call that there was a young black male who was running through the subdivision waving a firearm.
The person he shot wasn't a stranger. It wasn't an enemy. It was his own mother. He had killed her and her new boyfriend after realizing they were dating. Now, the police cameras captured a standoff no one could have prepared for. A child pointing a weapon at the very officers trying to save him from himself. Every second that passed felt like it could be the last, as officers pleaded with him to drop the gun. But what happened next would leave the community stunned and investigators piecing together how a family argument could explode into something this deadly. But the haunting truth of that night was far darker than anyone first realized. This is Viral Crime Stories. Please subscribe our channel. Tiffany Harris was known as the kind of woman who left an impression wherever she went. Born in 1984, Tiffany was 39 years old when tragedy struck her family. She lived a busy life, one filled with the constant demands of raising 3 children, but also one infused with joy and a sense of hope for the future. Friends and family described Tiffany as a light, the type of person whose smile could brighten the darkest of days. She wasn't just admired for her warmth, but for her resilience. Tiffany worked hard to provide for her children, balancing multiple responsibilities while always making sure that her family came first. But her life wasn't about luxury or ease. It was about dedication, sacrifice, and love. Those who knew her best said that everything Tiffany did, she did for her kids. But as much as Tiffany loved her children, pouring every ounce of her life into them, little did she know one of them would one day end up taking her life. She carried the weight of being both a caregiver and a provider, and yet somehow still managed to bring joy into the lives of those around her. She embodied what it meant to be a devoted mother, someone who never stopped giving, never stopped trying, and never let her children feel unloved or unsupported. And Tiffany had plenty to look forward to. Her oldest daughter was pregnant, and Tiffany was preparing for a new role in her life, becoming a grandmother. She was overjoyed. She talked about the baby constantly, sharing her excitement with family and friends. She dreamed about holding her grandchild for the first time, about the family traditions they would pass on, and about watching her daughter step into motherhood. This new chapter filled her with pride and happiness, but Tiffany's story was also defined by the people closest to her. Her youngest son, Aiden Barry, was just 14 years old. He was in the 8th grade, described by those around him as a quiet kid. He wasn't known for getting into trouble at school or in the neighborhood. On the surface, he appeared, like many other teenagers, a little withdrawn at times, still trying to figure out who he was and facing the everyday struggles that come with adolescence. There were no glaring warning signs that suggested Autumn was capable of violence. No reports of fights, no criminal history. To teachers and neighbors, he was just another boy finding his way through the world. But Autumn wasn't the only factor in Tiffany's story. Tiffany was also in a relationship with Cortavius Cruz, a 31-year-old man who lived with her in Riverview. Not much has been publicly shared about the relationship, but what is clear is that Cortavius was at Tiffany's home on the night that would change everything. He was there when the argument began, and he was there when a 14-year-old boy made a decision that would devastate everyone. On Sunday, September 10, 2023, it was a quiet evening in a suburban neighborhood. The day is winding down, families preparing for the week ahead. But behind the closed doors of Tiffany's home, tensions were rising. At some point that evening, Tiffany and Cortavius got into an argument. The specifics of what caused the disagreement remain unclear. Law enforcement had not disclosed the details of their fight, but what is known is that it escalated. Voices grew louder, tempers flared, and the atmosphere in the house shifted from calm to tense. But they weren't alone in the house. 14-year-old Adam was there, and he could hear everything. The raised voices, the argument growing hotter. And as the argument raged on, something inside him snapped. He stood up and walked towards where Tiffany's purse was kept and retrieved the handgun she carried inside it. That decision would lead to an irreversible tragedy. Adam walked back toward the argument where his mother and her boyfriend were seated and in his hands, the gun. In a split second, the situation escalated beyond repair. He opened fire. Multiple shots rang out inside Tiffany's home. Tiffany could be heard screaming, trying to get Adam to drop the gun, but he wouldn't listen. Tiffany tried to intervene to give Cruz a chance to escape, maybe because she thought her son wouldn't harm her, but she was wrong. She was struck by the bullets. She collapsed to the floor, fatally wounded. Her dreams of becoming a grandmother, her devotion to her children, her role as the family's light, all extinguished in a matter of moments. But Adam didn't stop there. He turned the gun toward Cortavius Cruz. The 31-year-old was shot multiple times in his torso, his hands, and even his face. Bleeding heavily, Cortavius somehow managed to stumble out of the house. His only thoughts now survival, and then silence. Meanwhile, Cruz, though seriously injured, staggered outside and called out for help. Neighbors saw him bleeding, terrified, and they immediately dialed 911. One call described a man stumbling through the subdivision, blood soaking his clothes, saying he'd been shot. But then another call would come in. The call was about a young boy armed with a gun who was wandering the neighborhood. But nothing could prepare investigators for what was going to happen next. When deputies from the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office arrived at the Riverview subdivision, the scene before them was like something out of a nightmare. In the driveway of the home stood 14-year-old Admary, and in his hands, the gun that had just taken his mother's life. For law enforcement officers, this was a situation unlike any other. They weren't just confronting an armed suspect, they were confronting a child. The deputies immediately set into motion a de-escalation protocol. They called out to Adam, pleading with him to put the weapon down.
Up, Hadim. Keep your hands up. Don't go back toward that thing, man. Walk toward me with your hands up. I'm gonna walk you through every process. Please don't pick that back up. Please don't. Hey, one person talking. Please don't pick that back up. I got you. I got you, dog. I'm telling you, I got you. Listen to how this will go. If you'll walk out to me with your hands up in the air. When you get to about right here, I'm gonna have you lay down on the ground. My gun is going in the holster. Bet that. It's going in the holster.
Neighbors hiding behind blinds and peering out from windows watched as the tense standoff began. Adam paced back and forth in the driveway. At times, he pointed the gun at the deputies. Other times, he pressed it against his own head, threatening to end his life. Each second dragged into an eternity. Their body cameras later revealed the intensity of the moment. Officers keeping their voices calm, hands outstretched as the 14-year-old paced back and forth.
End it this way. You don't want to end it this way, brother, I promise you. Whatever happened today, it can be fixed. Don't pull the trigger. Put it down. Adeem, put it down, buddy. Don't do it, man.
For 16 minutes, deputies tried to reason with him. One deputy's voice was calm, steady, almost parental. But the boy refused to surrender. He seemed torn between defiance and despair. The weight of his actions, killing his own mother, bore down on him. Yet he wouldn't let go of the gun. Deputies knew that if they rushed him, tragedy would multiply. And so they held their ground, trying every strategy to defuse the standoff. But then, as Adam lowered the weapon toward the ground, he suddenly made a move to grab it again. In that instant, deputies realized talk alone might not be enough to save him. That's when they made a critical decision to use less lethal force. A deputy fired a 40mm launcher, striking Adam in the hand and torso. The impact forced him to drop the gun. It was clear that the officer did not want to hurt Adam, but they also had to make sure he doesn't hurt himself. In that instant, deputies were able to get Adam to walk towards them and surrender himself. The standoff was over.
Somebody's got cover. All right. Hey, I was all the way down. Have we exfilled from that house?
Meanwhile, as deputies were negotiating with a team outside, other officers had to perform a dangerous rescue. Cruz, who had collapsed in a driveway, was bleeding from multiple gunshot wounds. Despite the risk that a dean could still fire from the driveway, they were able to carry Cruz, though, critically injured. He was rushed to the hospital. Doctors would later confirm that he had been shot 5 times, but he had survived. Inside the home, deputies discovered Tiffany Harris's lifeless body. Despite their best efforts, there was nothing anyone could do to save her. The community, however, would never be the same. What investigators and the community were left grappling with was far more complex. How could a quiet 8th grader with no prior criminal history commit such an unthinkable act against his own mother? Sheriff Chad Chronister would later describe the deputies' actions that night as a textbook example of de-escalation. Deputies According to Chronister, Adine put the gun to his head at least 6 different times during the 16-minute standoff, threatening to end his own life. They were calm, they were collective, there was no yelling, and they established a rapport with this young male, who at least 6 times continued to put the firearm to his head, threatening to commit suicide. Deputies showed remarkable restraint, never firing their weapons despite ample justification to do so. Instead, they pleaded with him, encouraged him, and worked to calm him down. Sheriff Chronister praised the marksmanship and restraint of his deputies, saying it not only saved lives that night, but also spared a child from being fatally shot by law enforcement. And then came the charges. 14-year-old Adine Barry was arrested and booked into juvenile detention. Prosecutors moved quickly, charging him with second-degree murder for the death of Tiffany Harris and attempted first-degree murder for the shooting of Cruz. The fact that prosecutors charged him with second-degree murder raised many questions. Why not first-degree, which implies premeditation? Legal experts explained that because the shooting erupted in the heat of argument, prosecutors believed it lacked the level of planning required for first-degree. Still, the penalties were severe, especially if tried as an adult, though just 14 years old. Florida law allows prosecutors to charge juveniles as adults in serious cases. Legal experts began debating whether Adam would face trial as a juvenile or as an adult, a decision that could determine whether he spends years in juvenile detention or the rest of his life in prison. But for Tiffany's family, the pain was immeasurable. Just days before her death, Tiffany had been overjoyed about becoming a grandmother for the first time. Her oldest daughter was pregnant, and Tiffany had already begun dreaming about baby clothes and cradles. Now, that same daughter was left to grieve the loss of her mother while preparing to welcome new life into the world, and her sibling, Adam, was behind bars, charged with their mother's murder, and Tiffany's other children were now left without both their mother and their brother. Detectives say this happened during an argument between the victim and her boyfriend. I spoke to her family members off camera today, and they say this tragedy is heartbreaking as not only have they lost that mother, but now her son is also facing time behind bars. The community held vigils for Tiffany, remembering her as a devoted mother, a woman of warmth and strength, and a friend who could light up any room. But alongside the grief was confusion. How could this have happened? How could a 14-year-old reach the point of killing his own mother during a family argument? Sheriff Chronister urged the public to view the tragedy as a warning about the silent struggles inside households. He made a direct plea. I want to take just a moment to make a plea for anyone out there that believes that they're a victim of domestic violence. For anyone out there that believes that they're facing a potential domestic violence, we have an absolute phenomenal resource here in the Tampa Bay area. The Spring of Tampa Bay will help you in every way imaginable. All you have to have is the courage to pick up the phone and say that violence will not no longer occur to me or my family. His words carried weight not just for Tiffany's family, but for an entire community now haunted by the sight of deputies negotiating with a child, begging him not to pull the trigger on himself. The tragedy left more questions than answers. Why had a deem snapped? Why had an argument between his mother and her boyfriend escalated to such unthinkable violence? Investigators admitted they might never fully know, but one thing was clear. This was family violence at its most devastating. The Riverview community struggled to comprehend what had happened. Parents in the area also admitted they felt unsettled. If a seemingly quiet, shy 14-year-old could do this, what did that mean about their own children, or about the unseen struggles young teens carry? If tried in juvenile court, Adam would likely remain in the system until age 21, at which point he would be released. If tried as an adult, however, he could face decades or even life in prison. Supporters of adults' prosecution argued that the crime was too serious for juvenile treatment, but others, including child advocates, pushed back. They pointed to Aiden's clean record, his age, and the possibility that he had acted in a moment of immaturity and emotional overload. When 14-year-old Adine Barry was taken into custody, the immediate focus was on the horrific tragedy that had unfolded inside the Harris home. But as the days passed and Tiffany Harris was laid to rest, the case began to shift toward a new complex question. Should Adam be prosecuted as a child or as an adult? It was a question that carried enormous weight not only for Adeem, but for his family. The grieving community and for a justice system often criticized for how it handles violent crimes committed by juveniles. Florida is known for having some of the toughest laws in the country when it comes to prosecuting minors. Under state law, juveniles as young as 14 years old can be direct filed into adult court if they commit certain violent felonies, including murder. That meant prosecutors had the discretion to decide whether to keep Adeem in the juvenile system, where he could only be held till age 21, or to charge him as an adult, where he could face decades in prison. Legal analysts emphasized that Adam's actions went far beyond a heated argument. He had retrieved a gun from his mother's purse, raised it, and fired multiple shots, not once, but repeatedly. He also turned the weapon on her boyfriend, Cortavius Cruz, nearly killing him. This wasn't a single impulsive act. Others raised concerns about public safety. If Ade were tried as a juvenile, he could be released at age 21, just 7 years after the killing. Would the community be safe knowing a young man capable of such violence was free again? But not everyone agreed. Child advocates, psychologists, and even some members of the community pushed back, urging prosecutors to consider Adam's age. Brain science was often mentioned. Research shows that the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for impulse control and long-term planning, isn't fully developed until the mid-20s. To them, Adam wasn't a hardened criminal. He was a deeply troubled boy who had made a catastrophic decision in a moment of rage and confusion. But at the end, the weight of the decision pressed heavily on prosecutors, defense attorneys, and the family itself. Would Adine spend the rest of his life behind bars? Or would he have a chance at redemption before adulthood? What do you think? Let us know what you think in the comments below. If you found this story intriguing, please like, share, and don't forget to subscribe to Viral Crime Stories for more stories like this.